Okay.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Salem Media of Hawaii.
Aloha and welcome to Be Fit for Health. This is Bianca, your host. I want to thank you again for joining me on this Sunday. We're going to have another great show for you. I actually went ahead and brought back a past guest, and I wanted to bring him back because I kind of felt like, we need some emotional health and emotional support and some mental health and mental support. We're all going through our lulls and our expectations of our lives, and things aren't going the way we want because of this COVID-19 epidemic. And it's getting in the way of our fun, so to speak. But I'm bringing back Dr. Tolly Amaxopoulos. I'm pretty close, I'm pretty sure. He'll correct me in a bit. But he is a behavioral clinical psychologist, and he's practicing here in Hawaii. And I just felt like from the last show that we had with him, it was so educational, but also enlightening in the sense of some of the things that we could do to control some parts of our lives, and also giving into some things that we can't control, knowing that it's something that we can't predict that's going to happen. I mean, worrying about things isn't going to help us any. It's not going to help our health. Definitely not going to help boost our immune system, because that's stress, right? Stress deters your body from getting healthy. So I think we need to bring him back to talk more about what can we do to create a more positive environment for our lives so that we can stay healthy. So, Dr. Tolly has basically been working with the Department of Health and Department of Education. He works with kids with ADHD, depression, anxiety for adults, as well as, couples therapy. So he's well-rounded, so he's got a lot of expertise. I'm very excited to bring him on. So welcome to my show.
Hey, thanks for having me on again. That last time was really fun.
Yeah, and it went by really quick. So, I think this time around, I kind of wanted to bring you back on. Now it's been, gosh, how many months? 5 months since our COVID-19 hit the islands.
Flown by, yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us have kind of gotten a grip on how to deal with it mentally and emotionally. And but I wanted to ask you too, since our last show, which was about maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, anything changed from your people that you've been seeing, or is the same scenarios?
There's still a lot of uncertainty in the air. I think generally people are still anxious, and especially with everyone's really kind of mindful of what different governments are doing. So people are kind of formulating their own opinions, and I'd say they're still kind of stressed out, just generally. It's affected teenagers that they're ready to go off to school, and now they're finding out that they can't, right? They have to do online schooling, and now should they just stay in state, right? Stay here and study here for a year and then transfer to where they wanted to go. But yeah, I think everyone's pretty much in flux in some way.
Yeah, because they're not in what they would consider a normal situation. So now they're being put into something that's, unpredictable or not familiar. And, having a classroom for children, if we're going to start with kids, is something that they were used to experiencing. Now children are more adaptable, more flexible, I would think, but still their routine is now completely change. And so they're also feeding off their parents' energy, right? So if their parents are anxious and feeling uncomfortable, and their routine is now messed up, they're picking that energy up from their parents, and they're feeling that anxious and they're feeling uncomfortable. So
yeah, well, not only that, but the younger kids aren't getting to socialize where they're going to be doing most of their learning, right? It's not just about the textbooks, it's about kind of navigating those weird social dynamics and, figuring them out. And if they're not, you can't really do that with Zoom as good as.
No, and a teacher can't really get a feel of, I'm assuming, because I'm not, I'm not a professional psychologist, but I'm assuming that the teacher can't even feel, to some degree, the intention or the whatever confusion a child might be having, because they're not physically there to sense that.
Yep, and I don't think you have to be a psychologist to do that, to pick up that, everyone's going to have a hard read on, on what's going on. online.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and unfortunately, this is going to be our normal for a while. And luckily for my brother's child, she's used to doing online classes because she's in a charter school.
Oh,
So she's already disciplined to work at from 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon,
wow.
and so she knows that that's her time to be online and be ready to go. Those kids who have never done online are going to be the ones that's going to struggle. So what suggestions would you have for parents to help them get, let's start with discipline, get them disciplined to get on the computer at 8 o'clock?
Yeah, well, I think the first step is probably just get a lay of the land, understand what is actually expected of their kid, understanding the technology, messing around with it a little bit to see how it works, because there's going to be all kinds of troubleshooting issues. Even things like internet speed could affect it, right? Some people might not have good internet, so I think there's a lot of things that before you even start the discipline process is just how's all this stuff work, what's expected, and how can we kind of measure it.
Right.
And from there, that's when you get into, I'm a fan of real talk, which is, kids typically, the kids I work with don't really respond well to being told what to do. And they're really good at noticing contradictions, when things just don't add up.
Yeah.
So a good old fashioned, hey, I know it's weird that you got to get up at this time, even though some kids, right, they might have a lot more freedoms. They may not have to be online in a class. And, just explaining that, yeah, even though it's really weird, to get up at 8 when technically you don't have to, it's going to be good for it's good for the long run. It's going to make you feel better. You can enjoy your video games or whatever you do at night more because you're not worried about, catching up on your homework or whatever. So I think just a good old-fashioned family talk is probably going to be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing that I notice about children is that if you're coming from a place of sincerity,
yeah,
they'll tend to listen and follow through than you, like you said, a lecture.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of parents where, oftentimes, a lot of kids don't know about their parents and some of their thoughts on what school's like for them. They just know that their parents are telling them, hey, study hard, do well, be successful. But as soon as I'll ask a parent, hey, did you like school? Sometimes they're like, no, I hated it. You can see the kid like, what? You didn't like school either? And there's kind of that connection, right? Mm-hmm. They have something in common that they thought that their parent was just kind of trying to grind them down to.
Right. Yeah, my brother and I were polar opposites. I mean, I was a B average, C average student, but I was well rounded in the sense that I really was interested in the arts and other things as well. So there are things that triggered me that math didn't trigger me, but other things triggered me, and so. But if you go by examples, like you said, I would talk to my niece and say, look, I wasn't really that great in school, but your dad was. We're the same household, but we were totally different in the way that we approach academics. So my brother used to try to make it fun for me. He was kind of like my tutor. So he would make it into a play type situation. Like if you do this for an hour, then you get to take a break and maybe watch TV for a half an hour. And then if you do this for another hour, then you get to take a break and then have a snack or, read or what have you. But today's would be your phone, right? You get to listen to music or what have you. But I think for me, I like I said, I'm not a psychologist like you, but if I had a child and he's never worked on a computer school setting type of thing where there's structure, I would say, look, just do your courses for the next 2 hours, and then when you're done, we'll get to do this. So maybe some rewards, slowly but surely, so until it becomes a pattern where you don't have to give those rewards, and then they're used to doing 2 hours of work at a time, knowing very well they're going to take a break, and keeping that consistency. Yeah,
that's really helpful. The thing with the rewards, though, they're really tricky to get down. So they actually do work, right? It's much better than kind of punitive measures, but with kids, typically, every 45 days or so, it's something new, right? So one month it could be Pokemon. That's like they're going to do anything, right? Next month it might be time on their Nintendo or something else, or the next time it might be. I work with some kids that they just want to go to their favorite restaurant,
Right.
once a month. So it takes quite a bit of talking and kind of weeding out exactly what's going to get them motivated, and then being kind of aware that it changes. Because in 3 months, if parents think that, why is it not working anymore? We're going to take you shopping for whatever Pokemon cards you want. It's
well,
like,
they're
no.
constantly stimulated, right? We're living in an era where
Right.
there's so many things for them to be entertained by that, like you said, when we were kids, well, when I was a child, it was one thing because we didn't have that many variety of things, right? Today they have a variety of like all the games on their phone, right? Or all the types of apps that they can download to do different things with. I mean, I would say whatever it is that floats their boat for that month, pay attention as a parent and try to get them to adjust. That's because at the end of the day, it's going to help free up the parents.
Yeah. I oftentimes joke that I take my childhood for granted, where we didn't have Instagram, right?
Yeah.
So I joke
Thank
that we were all miserable. There wasn't, everyone was bored and miserable in the summer. There was just not that much to do. So now it's like you couldn't see any kind of Instagram celebrity when we were growing up to be like, whoa, that type of lifestyle is possible.
We had MTV.
Right. Yeah. And that was the extent of it.
That was nothing. Yeah, and we thought that was racy, and
right.
The things that we were watching were like, oh, we better get parent permission to watch that. But going back to, the changes that are happening and the psychological effects that it's having on these children, and the parents worry that it's going to affect their children in a negative way because they're not getting that interaction, they're not getting that normalcy of classroom. The quality of the education too that they're concerned about. So I guess even though we're talking about kids and how to help them, look at things in a more positive respects, it really does fall on the parent, doesn't it?
Yeah, to a large degree, as the family kind of leader and setting the emotional tone.
So what would be what would the language sound like? Like how would you, with your experience, if you had your child, how would you talk to your kid? What would you say? Like, how would you explain the discipline factor of this online training, online schooling?
First, before I would even get into it, I kind of want to hear their thoughts. I'm curious what they really think about online schooling. And, I work with some kids where initially they're kind of like, oh, I'm really disappointed, that I can't go back to school. I'm like, well, are there any positive feelings about it? And some that have maybe social anxieties are like, yeah, I'm thrilled. I don't have to go back. It's actually amazing that I don't have to go back maybe for the whole year. So you never know. I'm always kind of surprised at which kid kind of shares which sentiment. But I think finding out more about what they think about, having to stay disciplined and, it's not going to be as exciting. It's kind of going to be a lonelier year, I think, to some degree.
Right.
But I think just acknowledging that could be really helpful. It's just going to be a way different experience than they've had, and you're available to help them in any kind of capacity you can. But most teenagers really don't want their parents kind of helping with time management. But
getting their emotional thoughts, their thoughts and their emotion out is going to help them at least compartmentalize what they may be feeling, because they may not understand what they're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, there's one whole branch of psychology called, person-centered psychology, where you're not really actively guiding anybody. All you're really doing is you're desperately trying to understand their perspective. And the idea behind it is the more you're really trying to get someone, the more they feel like they are important and valuable. And maybe if you give them that kind of unconditional positive regard, which that's what it's called, they're going to make kind of better and healthier choices. And the creators of that had this idea that we all are growing in a healthy direction. We just need somebody to kind of validate that journey.
Yeah, just like us adults, when we're doing our job, we want the validation that we're doing it right and we're doing it well. I think kids, it gives them a certain sense of confidence, right? When you ask them, how do you feel about something, and that you actually sincerely care about their answer, they're going to want to appreciate it. 2, that they're heard. And 3, they're going to want to keep expressing themselves to that particular individual because they are being listened to.
Yeah, but it's going to be a mixed bag too. I mean, with boys in particular, The amount of, and if we're just talking about teenagers here, I mean, the amount of testosterone in their bloodstream is going to affect how they communicate. They're not going to want to talk as much. They're going to be more irritable. They're going to be more competitive, and they're going to vary between 1 foot in boyhood, 1 foot moving towards adulthood. And it's an awkward journey. Whereas girls, on the other hand, estrogen, that creates this need for closeness, right? So they found that the communication cortex of boys and girls, boys have more neurons in that cortex, but for girls it's twice as dense. So they're finding that if a young girl or teenager, if they're not saying about 20,000 words per day, they're going to get a little bit anxious. They just need to communicate. For boys, on the other hand, 7,000, they're good. There's not really much more. That's probably too much.
Now that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can walk through pretty much any high school and kind of observe that to some degree.
But no, it makes perfect sense, and I'm just trying to figure, when it comes to the wellness of our thinking, you have it in one of the things that I took notes on is that you were talking about how thinking affects your physical health. Look, if we're worried about the way that our children are going to be healthy, and if they bring something home type of thing, you want their whole body to be thinking and being healthy, so that anything and everything they bring home is a positive response to the environment at home as well, especially if they're going to be learning from home. But I can't imagine that complete socialization is going to be out the door, even if they're homeschooled.
Yeah, there's going to be some. Yeah, I think kids are going to find a way to communicate and kind of meet that need. But yeah, it's going to just be a trickier time, right? No one really knows what's happening. There's vaccination trials that seem to be a far way out. Some countries are starting pretty early, but no one really knows what the next year is going to look like.
Yeah, that vaccination thing scares me though. It's so quick. They haven't really done enough testing, and I get worried about that too, because I just don't know to what degree, how much, because we get vaccinations every year for the flu, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's a hit or miss, and I'm just this is a new virus, and those vaccinations those viruses have been around for a while. This is a new one, so it's always a tricky thing. So I always get worried about that kind of stuff. But I think, look, if we do our part, if we do eventually open up the schools, which I know we will, as long as there's proper protocols in place, hopefully, I'm praying that this happens soon, that they do those protocols so that the teachers and the students are safe. But we also go back to a bit more normalcy of socializing in a normal way, in person. And that makes it for a better sounding environment for everybody, because we are creatures of groups. We like to be with people. We need to be with other people for us to be healthy. Yeah. And for us to grow also, I think, cognitively.
Yeah, especially for little kids, socialization, that's most of it, where most of the learning's done. You can't quite do that from a textbook. You need lots
and your personality develops this way too, right?
Well, I think you brought up an interesting point earlier where you were talking kind of about you and your brother growing up. Temperament is a really big deal in families, right? If you have 3 extroverts in a house and one of them's an introvert, they're going to have a very different experience than everyone else. But most people don't really consider that. They're just kind of like, oh, they're the black sheep of the family. But really, you have to talk to different types of temperaments differently. There's some kids where they do great in athletics, and you can tell them to do 50 push-ups. You can tell them to clean the dishes. They won't put up a fight. Other kids, you tell them to, walk on the right side of the road or anything, they're going to walk in the middle of the road, right? They're going to be polar opposites. So that's something I think we all have to take into consideration too. Just what's everyone's temperament in here? What's their are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Are they really agreeable to new experiences? Or agreeable in conversation? Are they open to new experiences? Those are the kind of big domains you want to look at.
Well, one thought comes into my mind too. Those kids who are quieter and who are also slower in movement, who may sit on the couch and be glued to their phone and not do much of anything, and completely is oblivious to their surroundings. And then having this kind of a mandate where they have to stay at home and be less social, because at least those kids are forced to go outside their comfort zone and forced to get outside their box. I would think doing something like this where they're stuck at home, what would you suggest for those parents to help them get out of maybe a depressive state?
I mean, I think the number one thing is getting them moving. I mean, that's really been shown to be one of the most helpful things.
Exercise?
Exercise, yeah. And interestingly, I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but I was reading an article where they're doing kind of these kettle swings where two people toss them back and forth, and it builds some kind of social connection between two people.
Oh yeah, it's something. So as you're interacting, whether it's a ball or what have you, you're throwing it to each other. There's a trust building thing. You trusting that the other person is not going to slam that at you, or you're forcing you to let your guard down. So it's forcing you to accept and receive their invitation to play, and it's like almost like a. It is. It's like team building. You know, you do this in your workplace. You know, you take your employees out and you do these physical activities where it takes groups of threes, let's say, and they have to do something together. All of a sudden, they're part of this clan. You know, against another clan. It just builds those three people even stronger bond together. So I would say exercise of some sort. With a teammate or a brother, sister, or sister, or friends, whatever, causes you to have that socialization, builds those endorphins, helps with creating an environment that is much more playful, so it's lighter, so there's no stress.
Yeah, and if you want to look at the most difficult case scenario, I mean, I think most kids are probably going to pick right. If they're have a predisposition to feel a little depressed and they've got mom and dad banging on the door telling them to go for a walk, they're probably not going to do it. But let's just say you've got a kid that won't listen at all, you know, will not adhere to anything the parents are saying. In a case like that, it might just be, you know, instead of bringing them the drink or whatever they're, you know, the monster drink or whatever kids are drinking these days, the kid, you have them just walk all the way downstairs to get it himself or herself. And it may not, it may not be as dramatic as running, you know, a couple miles or anything like that. And that kind of feeling, right, where you're just, you know, you might have kind of like what they call runner's high. It may just be that slow, you know, because what I found is change, you know, personality change is a really slow process. I mean, I love the idea that, you know, some change can be really instantaneous, but for the most part, you know, kind of healthy habits can develop over, you know, it takes a long time. Where, you know, at one point I even, you know, personally, I'm comfortable kind of sharing my experience with, you know, weightlifting. I you know, the first couple of years were really difficult just to get into the gym, right? There were some nights where, it's been a long day, I'll just wait till tomorrow, maybe take a couple weeks off. Where now it's just weird if I don't go in, right? I'm sure it's probably similar for you where once you really get it going, it's just bizarre if you're not exercising.
It's a weird experience if you're not doing what you've developed into a pattern. Yeah. Well, I think it's everything is a learned thing. I mean, I think to some degree there are characteristics, traits that you're born with. It's like genetics. They say nature versus nurture, and you can't change that too much. It really is like a stuck thing. But there are things that you can help maybe move it along a little to make it much more easier for them to endure changes. So if someone doesn't like change, throw them into a situation like this that we're living in now, which is the COVID-19 world. It's going to force them to adjust, whether they like it or not. And the key right now, I guess, and the reason why you're here is how do you help that along? Because there's no manual out there for parents to raise children. You know, there are experts like you that come along to help us kind of psychologically, I guess, prepare and to be able to speak the language that children will understand. What is the tone? What is the words? What are the things you can say? And I'm sure there's books out there now. I just don't know which. I'm not a parent, so I don't even know what books those would be. But I think the suggestion that you're saying, listening first, if we got anything out of it, out of this time that we've been talking, giving your child that respect or that courtesy to express their emotional self. And then would you immediately, after they've expressed themselves, give them some thoughts or advice?
There's a couple of thoughts here. Sorry, I have to write down all my
That's
ideas.
okay with
It's
me.
just, I'll forget them all. But there is a great book called The Whole Brain Child, which talks about children's neurodevelopmental kind of perspective on it, and it's really interesting because it gives a lot of good examples of exactly the verbiage to say.
Oh, great.
So what the whole book kind of preaches is this model of kind of connecting and then redirecting. So if a kid's saying, you told me you were going to buy me a bracelet and you didn't, I hate you. We just kind of go extreme here. Most parents will probably go right to redirecting, which is they might say something like, well, you just don't understand yet, right? Or something like, it's too complicated to explain why we don't have enough time, or they're not, they're just going to explain the kind of, maybe some environmental stuff happening. Where connecting and redirecting is the first thing is you try to connect with the emotion. So even if this kid for whatever reason has gotten a bracelet every single day for the past 5 days, and today's the only day they didn't, you're still going to try to identify with what's that like to not have something that you were expecting.
Right.
And it's easy, it's just kind of saying, hey, I know you were kind of expecting this, and we all were hoping it would work out. I know you're really upset, but money's really tight this month, and we just can't get you one more bracelet. And it doesn't mean the kid's not going to be angry.
Sure, they're going to respond like, I don't care.
Right. But there might be, all you're hoping for is just a little part of them that's kind of like, oh, they get it. They kind of get my experience just a little bit.
Right.
And what they're doing is saying that if you do that enough, you can make somebody feel understood. And it's, kids can have bad days. Kids can be angry, just like adults, right? So the idea is that it's just kind of giving them a little more space to be themselves and to validate their experience, which is, in a busy world, it's hard to do. I mean, It's hard enough to just get through our own lives, right? And much less, what's it like to be, 4 or 5 years old or 10 years old?
Right.
But that stuff helps, it really does help people feel understood, and that's half the battle.
Well, I like you said, I think half the problem with kids today is that they don't feel like what they have to say matters, or even when we were growing up, because parents back then really didn't listen to their kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think today, because of the education that we've gotten, we're learning more and more that children's thoughts and them expressing it helps their development of their self-confidence and trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big part of their emotional growth and that support system, because when you don't feel supported, you don't feel loved maybe, or you don't feel secure. That's kind of a big deal. And I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to asking how they feel about not going back to school and having to stay at home.
Yeah, just looking for a connection rather than a teaching moment, because kids, they're told what to do all the time.
Exactly. Well, we're going to take a really quick short break, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
It's going to be a minute, everybody, so don't go anywhere. We're going to come back with some more information on how to cope with things, discipline, how does thinking affect your health, and things like that. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back. All right, guys. We are with Dr. Tolly. We're talking about mental health for our children in this past half hour or so. And now we're getting into, so our kids are at home. They are studying with online service instead of being in classrooms. So what was that like? How do we help them get through that emotional state of mind? And so now they're at home, Dr. Tolly, and they have to do homework at home. Procrastination is a big problem, because I remember me as a child, I procrastinated a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in school, so I had to, I had teachers looking at me. How do parents help their kids get through the procrastinating phase of doing their homework at home?
Yeah, well, you said it. We all do it. I think it's part of human nature to some degree. It's that I think at baseline we like to relax and rest, and that's why it took us so long to build rockets, right? We didn't just start up with SpaceX.
Oh my gosh, yes.
2 million years ago.
Yeah.
We did a lot of relaxing. Procrastination, it's a big problem. It affects people's health ultimately, right? Because if you're constantly waiting for, until the last minute, to complete a project or homework, you're going to probably feel more anxious, right? You're probably going to feel more worried, and then that typically isn't good for the body, right? Chronic states of anxiety.
can create panic attacks.
Yeah, so there's a couple techniques. I mean, you could start with the standard to-do list.
Okay.
If you're talking just really bare bones approach, here's everything that you need to do, is the basic, right? Then the next step there would be rating each task, which one's a priority, and that's great for adults and kids because it's going to help teach kids, hey, what do I want to spend most of my time on, and then how long do you think each task will take you is kind of the next step. With a lot of folks that I work with ADHD, they have something called time blindness, where they have a really hard time figuring out how much time something's going to take them. So you might hear, this homework assignment is probably going to be an hour tops. They're up until 4 a.m. doing it, right? They just have a really hard time kind of assessing the length of things like that. And then there's a couple other tweaks you could do. I mean, I like the organized tomorrow today model, which is picking 3 musts each day and then a couple peripheral things to do. I think that's a positive spin on things. I like learning. I mean, learning about it's great. I mean, just with working with folks with ADHD, I've had to learn a lot of different organizational methods, and some people use note cards. I've seen some people use. Some people have their kind of assistants just tell them what to do if these are adults, I mean, not kids.
Or you were mentioning earlier before we started color coding.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
So green would be the most important things to do. Yellow would be the things that you can save for later if you have time, and then the red would be it's not as imperative, but it can be done maybe a week later. So for like kids, I would think like the homework that's due the next day, that would be all your green buttons, and then all your yellow ones would be some of this probably you have to study for a test at the end of the week or something, things like that.
Yeah, I like the Pomodoro method's good. That was created by, I don't know if it was an Italian something or other. I don't know what he did, but it's the Italian word for tomato, where he just had a tomato timer, in the kitchen, set it for 20 minutes, and then took a 5-minute break. 20 minutes again, 5-minute break. That one's a little bit dangerous though, because that 5-minute break could turn into
15 minutes.
3 months.
3 months, a year.
Yeah, right.
He flunked his 5th grade. He has to go back again.
Right. So it's a little bit dangerous, but that takes a little more discipline. But I like, what you said earlier with the reward. Some kind of reward link to it, I think is a really great suggestion too. Yeah,
so now you can combine all. You can do the color, the timer, and then the reward.
Yeah.
So I would say, okay, you have a homework due, you have 3 classes that homeworks are due tomorrow. So your first period is math, so you have to get that done first. Mm-hmm. So you have 1 hour to do it. After that hour, you get, 10 minutes on your phone to look at whatever you want. There's a timer on that too. It goes ding, that's like recess, right, in school? You have to get back to class. You have to do your next assignment. That's due. And then another 10-minute ding, recess is over. So I think creating almost like a structure like school where you have 3 classes and then you have a 10-minute recess, right? Or a 15-minute recess. And then you go back to another 3 classes and then you have lunch recess. And then you have 2 more classes and you go home. I think if we, like as if I have kids, I think as society, if we do this for our children at home, this may create that pattern after a period of time, so they know, because I think kids like the structure. Mm-hmm. If you leave it up to them, they'll do nothing. Yeah, unless they're special in the way that they want to do or structure themselves.
No, I think you're right, and I've worked with a lot of kids where I don't think there's one that's disagreed with me so far. Where if I talk about, all right, let's pretend you've got this big project due. Let's say you decide, all right, I'm going to do the project at midnight. I'm just going to play games until then. I tell them, I don't know if you can really enjoy video games that much, just because you're going to know it's kind of looming in the background, it's due. But if you were to get it done, earlier in the morning or before you played any games, chances are you probably really enjoy those games, right? There's nothing really that's kind of holding you back.
That's why you're the psychologist.
I mean, that one works well with the kids. But for the most part, they, it's each one's unique. Yeah. There's really not any kind of, I think everyone brings kind of their own unique life and challenges into it and what prevents them from kind of reaching their potential. But I do agree with you. I think structure is a great thing. For some reason I'm thinking about have you ever read the book The Alchemist?
Yes.
So I might kind of, this is my interpretation of it, so I might kind of butcher some of the details here, but one cool thing about this kid was he kind of wandered through the desert area by himself, and he really got into the daily rhythm, right? He had sheep or something at one point, and he kind of knew each of their personalities just because he spent so much time with them. He knew his routine, each one had a routine, and then he was in a shop where it was really boring, but the structure was there. He got to see customers, he got to understand personalities, what people were what they went in for first. And I think there is something really great about that kind of monotony where once who wrote that book? I think it was Jocko Willink. I haven't read it, but I think he said discipline is freedom or something like that. Being kind of that, if your life is really planned to the minute, that's kind of the ultimate freedom in some kind of way that's counterintuitive, because it doesn't seem like a very free life. But
right, it's too structured.
Yeah, but I think there is something to that daily structure.
It's a double-edged sword on that one, yeah, because freedom of not having a schedule, to a lot of people who are very independent-minded, don't want structure. They just want to go with whatever feels good at the moment. Yeah. And that's if you leave that up to teenagers, that would be their philosophy. But they don't realize that subconsciously we all want structure, because it gives us a certain level of, I know what's coming up next. That knowing gives you that freedom.
Yeah, in a weird way, that's how it worked. When I was working on my dissertation, I remember I was working in between circuit and district courts. I had all kinds of these rotations. I was at Hawaii State Hospital, I was at a mental health center in Kaneohe, and then in the courts here in town. And I could not get in the habit after a long day of working on my dissertation. So I went to Best Buy and I just got, I think it was like a $50 Chromebook. And I was like, every spare second I get, I'm just going to work on my dissertation. Because you're in court a long time, right?
Right.
I was really like most people. I would just sit there and, play on my phone, text people, just, wait until your next, the next thing that you're asked for, yeah. But instead I'm like, well, let's see how far I can get with this thing. And I would say it wouldn't have been my best work right up front, because it was just hard to get into it. But once you kind of get into the flow of it, that okay, I got a break, let's start typing. And every 3 or 4 paragraphs, it would be 1 or 2 really good sentences I could use. It wasn't, I'm not like Ernest Hemingway. It was just...
You're probably a better writer than I am, but yes.
I don't know about that, but it got done in about a year. And I had way more than I needed, just because every spare second I kind of dedicated, to it. And yeah, I think that kind of structure was helpful. It was like Pavlovian conditioning, right? Oh, I got a break. Let's see how much I can get done.
Right.
And then I remember it was a little confidence boost, because it's like, oh yeah, if I was on my phone, I would have really been doing nothing. So, and then I'd get farther along, and I'm kind of seeing its progress, and it's like, wow, this is pretty cool to almost be done with this thing,
Well, you challenge yourself. You gave yourself it was like a game. You gave yourself something to see what can you get done in a way of play. And I think there was another guest that I had. He goes, the funny thing is adults forget to play.
They do.
So because we forget to play, everything becomes a chore. And that's why I said, I had a question right now is, how do you get your kids as a parent to not look at it as a chore, but as a healthy outlook in getting things done? That question meant a lot. It says a lot in just 2 lines, because how do you get your child to look at their schoolwork and look at the change in doing their schoolwork from home versus in a classroom? Because there's a lot more distractions at home than there are at school. I mean, you've got the TV, you've got the kitchen, you've got your phone, you've got your siblings. You're going to have a lot of reasons why you don't have to go and do your homework. At school, at least you get most of it done, and then you have some left over, and you have to do it at home, whatever's left over. But how do you get that? How do you get that positive?
Well, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think it's balance. I think originally one of the questions people would ask, Sigmund Freud, was who needs therapy? And then when it was kind of a new concept, why would anybody, pay for this kind of service? And he said, well, I think if somebody if somebody has problems in their love or their work, they're probably going to need to explore some unconscious things happening, that they may just not be aware of, that's keeping them from, loving at an optimal capacity and working at an optimal capacity. And then I think 30 or 40 years later, a pediatrician came along and said, well, love and work are important, but there's a lot of adults that can't play.
Yeah.
And they kind of made the argument that if somebody can't love or work or play in a real conscious, I guess, healthy way, then there's probably some room in there for therapy and kind of that inner exploration. If that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, so you created a healthy pattern. That was my next question. How do you create a healthy pattern of thinking to create you to be much more disciplined so that you're not procrastinating? I mean, this is the whole concept of the show today. So the one of the things you said was you went out and you got yourself, a way of creating your thesis paper so that it's much more, you have a time slot in between your work, and eventually you got to your destination. You got your chore done. But it wasn't painstaking. You made it playful.
Yeah, well, and also too, there was another component I didn't really mention, which is urgency. Right. And I heard a really cool method. I've never thought of this, but I think it's brilliant. This one, I was reading on kind of one of these management techniques, and this one author suggested if you're having trouble building urgency, because that's the $1 million question, right? How do you get somebody to really feel the pressure of,
right,
accomplishing something that needs to get done? So what she suggested was get your laptop to 30 or 40% battery and go to a coffee shop without a charger. You're not going to be playing around on Facebook. If you have a task, you're going to try to fly through it. Now we can't really go to a coffee shop, right? I think this is pre-COVID. But,
no. That charger's right in that drawer, sorry.
Right, yeah. But I kind of like that model where it's kind of this artificial way to create. You've got to get in your car, you've got to leave your parking lot, you've got to pay for this coffee. I mean, there's a lot invested to get to this coffee shop.
But I'm telling you, you did such a great job, and now you got me thinking this way too. That urgency can be a time thing.
Yeah.
A time. So if we can get those alarm clocks, the ones that ring for cooking or what have you, and you set it up for that 1 hour.
Yeah.
And you make it fun, like keep it playful. Like if I have to get something done and I'm like, okay, I got to finish this by 1 hour, and see if you can.
Yeah.
As an adult even, because this is an issue. Like as a manager or a director, you have your employees. You've got to get your people to do their job.
Mm-hmm.
Even in psychology, okay, you can say we're gonna set a game. Whoever finishes their work within this time frame, you guys are gonna get X, Y, Z. Incentivize, right?
Yeah.
Even as adults.
It works, yeah. And I think there's actually a Pomodoro app.
That's awesome.
And here's the thing, now that I mention it, so when I first learned about it, this is years ago, I think it was 20 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break. But I think that's been criticized a little bit recently. I think people are recommending more like an hour, hour and a half, and then a 20-minute break. But, my takeaway here is it's probably individual, right? Some people can't work for 90 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say, the ADHD thing you're talking about, adults have it too. So if you have an attention span of 30 minutes and you need another 20 minutes of break because that's just the way you are, I guess you have to know your kids and you have to know yourself. So being realistic too is another way of creating success and not failure.
I'm okay with 2 minutes. If a kid is really defiant, I'd say if this kid can get his name and date on a piece of paper,
that's extreme.
Let's call it a day. Tomorrow we're gonna try to go for problem 1. But I'm usually I think sometimes people come in so hot, right? They want to really just make this instant change where. For some people, it's extraordinarily hard. And plus, there's so much control issue sometimes where a kid, by acquiescing to their parents, they feel like they're relinquishing all their control, right? So there's that dynamic. It may not even be ADHD.
Defense mechanism,
yeah. Exactly.
They're constantly on high alert. And that's where you're trying to soften those extreme children who are high-strung. You need to give them small tasks. And I think at the end of this, day, in this type of conversation, I know we focused a lot on kids because I think a lot of the psychological issues that adults are having now are, how am I going to take my kids from going to school to being at home? How am I going to be able to educate them? Are they going to get a good quality education? I'm going to be so tired because I have to work and then I have to deal with my children. All those stresses that adults are facing. the whole purpose of the show is to see if we can give them some insight as to how they can maybe start something with them. And I think one was, having hearing them out, giving them sound advice on possibilities and maybe using your own personal experience, like you said, right? Maybe giving them a task that's specific, but making it fun and playful by giving them a time and using maybe color stickers for urgency versus something they can do later. Rewarding them for every time they do something well and on time. So teaching them that doing their job correctly and timely is a good thing. So it's rewarding them that way. When they do something wrong, though, I think that should be another conversation and hearing them out as to why they didn't do it. How were they feeling at the time and why were they reluctant? And then maybe giving them positive reinforcements as to maybe next time they should voice themselves instead of not doing it at all. That might be a positive reinforcement. But everything I'm saying is just basically summarizing our entire hour of conversation.
That was an amazing summarization, by the way.
I was listening.
You were, without even writing anything down. You just hit all
spit
the
it all
high
out.
points.
I had some nutritious drink earlier, so because it's all my kale and my vitamins.
The kale did it?
Yeah,
Nice.
there's a kale kicker that I drink at the club that has ginger and some other things in it, so you're in trouble. No, but I think it's fantastic sound advice too, that you shared some insights, and it's things that we may actually understand and know, but we forget because we're all stressed out about things.
Yeah.
And you just simplified it, and you made it fun, and I feel like you've given us some tools that will keep us going as, our children are trying to get adjusted. I know this became about kids, the show, and I wanted to get into adults, but I think there's so much to be talked about in psychology and mental health and emotional health that that this 1 hour just basically have to cover just this one part of children's lives, which is their schooling now at home. But I think any last words that you'd like to say and suggest for these parents and kids that are having to deal with this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of biased because this is what I do, but anytime I kind of encounter any type of obstacle, I'm really just looking at what can I read about it. So if your kid's struggling with procrastination or an adult is, I'd get the top 3 books on Amazon or Kindle edition or whatever, audiobooks or whatever people want to listen to. If people are struggling with really kids with explosive tempers at home, read, get The Explosive Child, because I think humans are real smart, and I think we can eventually figure our problems out. But my kind of mentality is, why not consult with somebody that's met 100 types of me, right? That have of my own personal kind of obstacle.
Are there any apps that parents can download to help them with, ADHD children or children that have hard time learning? Are there any apps that they can download to help them go through maybe XYZ programs with their kids or themselves by themselves before they implement it with their children? Or is there any type of a program that they can download from the computer that they can start teaching themselves how to deal with their kids?
Sure. I can't, it's funny, I just gave a presentation called There's an App for That for the Department of Ed, but I didn't pick any for ADHD, but I mean, I'm sure there's some out there, but I think that's a great idea. But I think the more you can learn about any kind of issue, probably the better. I mean, that's my approach.
Yeah, and I was also going to say too out there to the audience, I mean, and you could probably chime into this, how kids have to be taught at home. I mean, if the government ends up giving parents the money instead of giving it to the schools, because there's no school, there's no teacher, giving them money, because they were talking about this, giving the money to the parents, then the parents could probably collectively, in groups that they are friends, hire a teacher so that it keeps the teachers employed, like a side job, and pay them to teach their kids in a obviously social distancing environment so they can keep learning their schoolwork. If the Zoom thing doesn't work, because we don't know how all of this is going to pan out, because we're just starting this. But there are so many options out there that, I mean, if I was a parent, I would want my kids to keep learning. I wouldn't want them to stop. Even if there was no school, I'd probably want them to keep doing their math and keep doing their science work so they don't forget.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's going to be the Wild West. I'm not
Yeah.
certain. I actually just joined a committee for the Department of Ed to try to figure it out. So
I just gave you an idea.
Yeah, yeah. I'll text you.
Yeah.
Some
You can pay me later.
nice. Yeah, I'll be one
yeah.
of the teachers.
I'll be one of the advisors. I have a person. I have a connection. I'll let you know. I know a guy. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think however we approach this, I just want parents to know that there's got to be out there in the computer world some kind of app to help their children adjust. You mentioned some books. What were they again?
Oh, The Explosive Child's good. Anything on any of the top 5 on ADHD. Anything by Russell Barkley. Driven to Distractions, a good one for ADHD. A couple good ones for depression too. I mean, there's just tons of great material out there. So, yeah, I'd say consult with, and when I say consult, I'm just saying like, read a book by somebody that's worked with thousands of people just like you in this particular area.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to just generate ideas of what's going to help. And, and I'm still confident we're going to figure something out for this year.
That's
I mean,
great.
There's a lot of really bright people that are, already coming up with a lot of ideas to make it work. So.
Yeah, I think the fact that you just gave us an exclusive that you're part of the Department of Education. I know somebody. Is going to be great because here you are giving us sound advice, and that makes me feel really good knowing that you're part of that group, because now I know that at least our kids have a fighting chance with getting the proper type of direction for education. So thanks for that, and
Sure.
thank your people that are working hard to put this together for our kikis. But I guess we're running short on time. We have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to invite you back again, right?
Sure.
Because it looks like we've got topics that are coming up that we need to talk about, and I want people to know they have a person that they can rely on that's a specialist like you. So are you still full, like with your practice?
Yeah, but I've got a website up running now. Which,
what is that?
Psychology Center Hawaii.
Okay.
And that's up and running. So I'm sure there's, I can't take any more referrals. Obviously, just totally.
You're a wanted man. You're everywhere.
Yeah, I'm really everywhere.
Yeah, so you guys, this was a special. I pulled some strings and got him into the studio last minute. He's like, okay, for me, he did it, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, and not that busy. I always make time. This is actually pretty fun coming down and talking to you, so it doesn't feel stressful.
I'm not that scary, people. Yeah. I'm actually fun.
The first run though,
You were nervous?
Much more nervous. Yeah, this is.
Now you know what to expect. See, you said structure. When you know what to expect, you feel free. Yeah. You're free now, right?
I know.
See, that's great.
I just forgot a hydro flask. That would have really been like the best.
Oh, you're crazy. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing today, and we'll have you back for sure. And for those of you who want to reach out to me as well, it's bfit4health.com. And check out my YouTube, guys, and subscribe and like some of the shows that I already have in place. And, there's a lot of shows on there, and Dr. Tolly's on one of them in the past. So if you want to review that one again, go ahead and do that. It's Be Fit for Health on YouTube. And also, if you need to reach out to me, go to my website, and there's a contact page there. If there's any questions or concerns, if you want to reach out to Dr. Tolly and you forgot how to reach out to him, because he's got his website now. What was that website again?
Psychology Center Hawaii.
You have to say it a couple of times for us to remember.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you guys for tuning in. I wish you guys good health. Be safe. Remember to social distance, and take care of your kapunas and your keikis and yourselves. I wish you the best. Aloha.